Welcome back to Silk Warrant. Today in this story is about the moment a man sent a bulldozer and didn't know who he was dealing with.
The soil was still warm under my fingernails when I read the demolition notice on my phone. My landlord, Gerald Marsh, had called the city himself. From my hospital bed, I could smell the lavender hand soap the nurses kept leaving on my tray, and I remember thinking, he did this while I was hooked to an IV. He waited for the exact right moment. And I remember thinking, he has no idea what I've been studying for the last 3 years. There was a single envelope in my nightstand drawer I hadn't opened yet. My name isn't important right now. What matters is this: I had built something real. 6 raised beds, a greenhouse I'd assembled from reclaimed windows, and a contract with 3 local restaurants who bought my heirloom tomatoes, edible flowers, and culinary herbs every single week. It wasn't a hobby, it was a registered business. 3 years of work on a half-acre lot I leased from Gerald Marsh, a man who wore the same beige polo to every interaction and called me sweetheart, even after I asked him not to twice. The lease agreement said in plain language that I had the right to operate a lawful business on the grounds. Gerald had signed it. I had a copy. He'd laughed when I asked for one. "Relax, honey. You think I'm going to sue you over tomatoes?" He laughed like a man who has never lost anything. I filed the copy in a manila envelope in my kitchen drawer and went back to work. 3 years later, I was in the hospital with a ruptured appendix, emergency surgery, 4 days of recovery, the kind of absence you can't plan for. Gerald knew. My neighbor Denise had called him personally to explain why rent would be 2 days late. He'd said, and Denise heard this clearly, not a problem. She should focus on getting better. He sent a bulldozer the next morning. I drove myself home on day 5 because I couldn't afford another night. My incision was still held together with surgical tape. I turned onto my street and I stopped the car in the middle of the road. It was flat, all of it. The beds, the greenhouse, the cedar-framed compost system I'd built over one entire weekend in October. The lavender border along the fence. Gone. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt. The smell of turned earth was so strong I could taste it through the window. Denise was standing at the edge of the property line, arms crossed, face tight. "He did it yesterday around noon," she said. "I filmed it." She handed me her phone without me asking. I watched Gerald Marsh stand at the edge of my property in his beige polo, hands in his pockets, watching the machinery work. At one point, he put his hands in his pockets and rocked back on his heels. That little rocking motion, like a man very comfortable with the outcome of things, I made a note of it. I did not cry. I photographed everything. The soil displacement, the foundation scars, the crushed greenhouse glass. I photographed the tire tracks. I photographed the city permit that had been stapled to my fence post, issued 3 days ago, while I was still in the ICU. There was something wrong with that permit. I just needed time to find it. 3 days after I got home, a certified letter arrived from Gerald's property management company. It said my lease was being terminated due to, quote, unpermitted commercial activity in violation of residential zoning codes. He'd had someone type it up nice. Official letterhead. A signature from a paralegal named Brent. I read it twice. Then I put it in the manila envelope with my lease copy. Gerald's logic was simple, and I'll give him credit. It was almost smart. He believed that because I hadn't pushed back, because I was quiet, because I was a woman who grew flowers and sold herbs, that I was soft. He had looked at me for 3 years and seen exactly what he expected to see. He was right about one thing. I had been quiet. He was wrong about why. That envelope in my nightstand. The one I hadn't opened when I was reading his demolition notice in the hospital. It was from the State Bar Association. I had taken the bar exam 11 days before my appendix ruptured. 3 years of night school. I'd enrolled the same month I signed Gerald's lease. Every Tuesday and Thursday evening, while my herbs were growing and my restaurant contracts were building, I was sitting in a fluorescent classroom studying property law, contract law, landlord-tenant statutes. I opened the envelope when I got home from the hospital. I had passed. I set the letter on my kitchen counter next to the demolished greenhouse glass I'd saved as evidence, and I made coffee, and I sat down, and I began to work. The permit. I told you there was something wrong with it. The city had issued a demolition permit for abandoned agricultural structures. That was the language Gerald's team had used on the application. Abandoned. My business had active contracts. I had invoices dated the week of my surgery. I had 3 restaurant owners who could testify that they had expected a delivery the Tuesday after I went under. I had Denise's video of Gerald watching the demolition, time-stamped, geotagged, and in the background of that video, you could see my hand-painted business sign, still standing at the entrance to the lot. Still up, still readable, not the sign of an abandoned business. Gerald had falsified a permit application. That wasn't a lease dispute, that was fraud, but I wasn't done. The residential zoning claim in his termination letter, my lease had a commercial use rider. He had signed it. And the city's records, which I pulled, because I now knew exactly how to pull city records, showed that the zoning for my specific parcel had included agricultural and small commercial exemptions since 1987. Gerald either didn't know his own property's zoning history or he was betting I didn't. Either way, I had him in 3 separate directions. I thought about calling him. I decided not to. I need to tell you about Denise, because her part in this matters. Denise had rented from Gerald for 9 years. She was the kind of neighbor who brought soup when you were sick, which she did, showed up with a container of chicken and rice when I came home from surgery. She also had her own grievances with Gerald. 3 years of ignored maintenance requests, a heating system that quit every February, a fence repair he had billed her for twice. When I told her what I'd found, not everything, just enough, she asked one question. "Can you help me too?" "Yes," I said. "But not yet." She nodded like she understood something she hadn't needed explained. What neither of us knew yet was that Denise had saved every single letter Gerald had ever sent her. 9 years of correspondence, in a shoe box under her bed, in chronological order. She handed it to me on a Thursday afternoon, and I took it home and I read until 2 in the morning. What was in that shoe box should not have existed. I gave myself 90 days. 90 days to document, to research, to make sure every single claim was airtight. I filed with the State Housing Authority first. Gerald's permit fraud, submitted with Denise's video, my active invoices, and a 15-page brief I wrote myself. I filed a civil suit for destruction of business property, using the signed commercial lease rider, the zoning records, and a professional appraisal of what my business and equipment had been worth. And using Denise's shoebox, I filed a separate complaint on her behalf for habitability violations and fraudulent billing. 9 years of documentation, organized by date. Cross-referenced with the city's inspection records, which showed Gerald had been cited and fined 4 times for conditions he'd charged tenants to repair. I mailed Gerald a copy of everything, all 3 filings together in a large envelope. At the bottom of the stack, I included one more document, my law degree. Still in the plastic sleeve, the school had shipped it in, and a handwritten note on a plain index card that said, "You were right that I wouldn't sue you over tomatoes. You were wrong about everything else." He called me. I know this because Denise, who was standing in my kitchen when the number appeared, started recording without being asked. I put it on speaker. "Now listen," he started. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be." I said nothing. "I've got a lawyer and he thinks you've got some procedural issues with." I said nothing. There was a pause, and then Denise and I both caught it, he exhaled. And over the phone, I heard the sound of Gerald Marsh rocking back on his heels, shoes shifting. That same body language from the video, the motion of a man who was used to being the most comfortable person in the room. He wasn't comfortable. "What do you want?" he finally said, and there it was. The whole conversation had been in that question all along. I told him exactly what I wanted, in numbers, without emotion. His paralegal, Brent, called back the next day to say Gerald had agreed to settle. The settlement paid for a new space, better soil, more light, A permanent commercial lease with a landlord who didn't know my name yet and had no opinion about it. On the first day I broke ground, I planted lavender along the fence line first. Same variety. It'll take a season to bloom. I worked until my hands were dark with soil. I could smell the earth, that same turned earth smell from the day I came home from the hospital, standing in my driveway, looking at the flat, empty lot he'd made. Same smell, different meaning. I'm not going to tell you I didn't think about Gerald as I worked. I did, but not the way you'd expect. I thought about how certain he was that he'd read me correctly. How much confidence it takes to move a bulldozer onto someone else's livelihood while she's in a hospital bed and still believe you're the reasonable one. Certainty like that is its own kind of blindness. I spent 3 years building two things at the same time: a garden that could feed a neighborhood and the tools to protect it. I never told anyone because there was nothing to tell yet. The work was the answer. The silence was the strategy. There's a version of this story where I break down in the hospital room, or confront Gerald at the fence line, or post the video before I was ready. I've lived that version in my head 100 times. It's loud. It feels good for about 30 seconds. It changes nothing. The quiet version took longer, it cost more, and it was the only one that held. So here's the question I want to leave with you. Not about Gerald, not about landlords, not about justice. If the people who underestimate you most had to describe you today, would their version of you be the last thing they ever got wrong about you? The soil was still warm under my fingernails. It still is. That part didn't change. Everything else did.